Imagine it's 1716, a time when plantations were ruled by fear and silence, and no one dared to question power. Until one woman did, changing everything without asking permission. This is not just a story about fire or punishment, but about how courage can shake an entire system. So if stories like this keep you hooked and make you see history differently, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments which state you're watching from.
In the year 1716, the plantations near Lima were ruled by fire. Not the kind of fire that gives warmth or light, but a fire that controlled people's lives. Coal furnaces burned day and night, sending thick smoke into the sky. Everyone who lived and worked there understood one simple truth: the furnaces were power. They decided who lived in peace and who suffered in silence. Esperanza de Lima was born into this world of smoke and fear. She did not grow up hearing stories of hope or freedom. Her childhood was filled with orders, heavy work, and quiet warnings. From a very young age, she learned when to lower her eyes and when to stay silent. Silence was safety. Speaking was dangerous. The plantation owners lived far from the furnaces, in large houses with clean air and wide spaces. They rarely touched the coal or felt the heat, yet their power came from that fire. The workers, the poor, and the enslaved lived close to the furnaces because that is where the work was hardest and the punishment fastest. Esperanza's family belonged to this side of life. As a child, Esperanza watched adults return from work with burned hands and tired faces. She saw fear in their eyes, even when they tried to smile. People spoke softly at night, always careful, always alert. Everyone knew that a small mistake could lead to the furnaces, and once someone was taken there, they often did not come back the same. Sometimes they did not come back at all. The fire was not only used to run the plantations, it was used to control behavior. Plantation owners believed fear made people obedient. If someone spoke back, worked too slowly, or disobeyed an order, the furnaces were mentioned. Sometimes they were only mentioned as a threat. Other times they were used without warning. This made the fire feel alive, like a silent guard that never slept. Esperanza grew up watching this system work again and again. She saw how quickly power could turn cruel. She saw how easily human life was treated as something cheap. No one explained this to her. She learned it by watching. When Esperanza became old enough to work, she was sent near the furnaces. The heat was strong, and the air was heavy with smoke. Coal dust covered everything. Breathing was hard, and resting was rare. Many workers tried to avoid this place, but Esperanza stayed. Not because she liked it, but because she understood it was important. The furnaces were the heart of the plantations. To understand the heart was to understand the whole body. Day after day, she stood near the fire. She saw how it was fed, how it was controlled, and how it was feared. She noticed how guards acted around it, sometimes careless, sometimes strict. She noticed how plantation owners spoke differently when they stood near the furnaces. Their voices became sharper, their words became heavier. The fire gave them confidence. Esperanza also noticed something else. The fire did not choose its victims. It did not know names or faces. It did not understand guilt or innocence. It only burned what was placed inside. This thought stayed in her mind, quiet but persistent. At first, Esperanza felt the same fear everyone else felt. When someone was punished, her heart raced. When someone screamed, her hands shook. At night, she remembered those sounds and struggled to sleep. Like many others, she hoped things would change. She hoped someone powerful would stop the cruelty. She hoped justice would arrive. But time passed and nothing changed. The same men stayed in power. The same punishments continued. The same fire ruled everything. Slowly, Esperanza's fear changed into something else. It did not disappear, but it no longer controlled her. Instead, she became observant. She began to notice details others ignored. She noticed routines. She noticed patterns. She noticed weaknesses. Plantation owners rarely noticed her. To them, she was part of the background. This made her invisible, and invisibility became her shield. They spoke freely around her. They complained, laughed, and planned punishments without thinking twice. They did not believe someone like Esperanza could understand them, let alone remember their words. But she remembered everything. She remembered names spoken with pride. She remembered jokes made at the cost of others' pain. She remembered how easily cruelty became entertainment. Each memory settled inside her, building quietly. She did not react. She did not argue. She did not protest. She continued working, listening, and watching. The fire taught her many lessons. It taught her how fear was created. It taught her how power protected itself. It taught her how silence could hide strength. Esperanza began to understand that the system around her was not broken. It was working exactly as intended. It was built to protect the powerful and crush the weak. This understanding did not come with anger at first. It came with clarity. Esperanza stopped expecting kindness from those in control. She stopped believing that suffering was accidental. She realized it was planned, accepted, and defended. At night, when the furnaces burned lower and the plantations grew quiet, Esperanza often stood alone and watched the flames. She felt the heat on her skin and thought about how many lives had been shaped or destroyed by this fire. She thought about how fear had ruled for so long that people accepted it as normal. She did not yet know what she would do. She did not make promises or plans, but something inside her changed during those nights. She stopped seeing herself as powerless. She understood that knowledge itself was a kind of strength. Part 1 of Esperanza's story is not about action. It is about awareness. It is about a woman growing up in a world where fire ruled everything and learning how that rule worked. It is about watching, understanding, and surviving long enough to see the truth clearly. The fire continued to burn, just as it always had. But now, someone was truly paying attention.
Esperanza's life did not become cruel all at once. Cruelty entered it slowly, quietly, and then stayed. By the time she was a young woman, pain felt normal, like the heat from the furnaces, always there, always burning, even when no one spoke about it. Every morning began the same way. Workers woke before the sun, their bodies already tired. Food was little, rest was short, orders were loud, mistakes were costly. Esperanza learned early that kindness was rare and punishment was common. People were not treated as people. They were treated as tools that could be replaced when broken. Cruelty was not only in beatings or threats. It was in small things. It was in how guards laughed while giving orders. It was in how plantation owners spoke about workers as if they were animals. It was in how families were separated without warning. Esperanza saw mothers cry quietly, knowing tears would change nothing. She saw children grow serious too early. She saw men lose hope before they lost strength. As Esperanza grew older, she understood that cruelty had rules. It followed a system. Those with power rarely faced consequences. Those without power were blamed for everything. If crops failed, workers were punished. If tools broke, workers were punished.
If an owner was angry, someone else paid the price. The system never questioned itself. Esperanza worked wherever she was told. Some days were in the fields, other days near storage rooms, and many days close to the furnaces. Each place taught her something. The fields showed her exhaustion. The storage rooms showed her hunger. The furnaces showed her fear. Together, they shaped her understanding of the world. She learned to read faces. She could tell when a guard was bored and careless, and when one was cruel and alert. She could tell when punishment was coming just by the tone of a voice. This skill did not make her safe, but it helped her survive. Cruelty also shaped how people treated each other. Fear made some workers silent. It made others angry. Sometimes people turned on each other, hoping to protect themselves. Esperanza did not judge them. She understood why fear made people act in ways they never wanted to. She saw how the system forced people to choose between survival and dignity. At night, when the work ended, the pain did not. Bodies ached. Memories stayed awake. Esperanza listened to whispered stories of past punishments, of people who tried to escape, of people who spoke up once and were never seen again. These stories were not intended to inspire hope. They were told as warnings. Esperanza often wondered how cruelty became so easy for the powerful. She watched plantation owners attend religious gatherings, speak about honor, and call themselves good men. Then she watched the same men order punishments without hesitation. This confused her at first. Later, it made her realize that cruelty did not always come from anger. Sometimes it came from belief, the belief that others were less human. The furnaces remained the strongest symbol of this belief. Everyone feared them, even those who claimed authority over them. Fire did not care about status, but people used it to show status. Esperanza saw how often the threat of the furnaces was enough to silence a room. No action was needed. Fear did the work. Cruelty shaped Esperanza's inner world as much as her outer life. She became careful with her words. She controlled her expressions. She learned when to disappear into the crowd. This was not weakness, it was awareness. She understood that survival required patience. But patience did not mean forgetting. Esperanza remembered every unfair punishment she saw. She remembered the names of people who never came back. She remembered how easily their absence was accepted. Life moved on. Work continued. The fire kept burning. This hurt her more than the cruelty itself. It showed her how quickly suffering could be erased. Over time, Esperanza stopped expecting help from outside. She realized that no authority was coming to protect them. The law belonged to the same people who caused the pain. Justice was a word spoken far away from the furnaces. Understanding this changed her deeply. It did not make her loud or reckless. It made her quiet and focused. Cruelty also taught her about invisibility. Plantation owners rarely looked at her directly. Guards barely remembered her face. This hurt at first, but later she saw its value. Being unseen meant being underestimated, and being underestimated meant being ignored. She noticed that those who spoke the loudest were watched the closest. Those who complained openly were punished quickly. Those who stayed silent were forgotten. Esperanza chose silence, but not because she accepted cruelty. She chose it because she was learning. Her life became a careful balance. She followed orders just enough to avoid attention. She helped others when she could, quietly, without drawing notice. She observed everything, the routines, the habits, the moments when rules were relaxed, the moments when power became careless. Cruelty shaped her thoughts, but it did not destroy her humanity. She still felt pain when others suffered. She still felt anger when injustice appeared. The difference was that she no longer wasted those feelings. She stored them. She let them harden into understanding. By the end of this part of her life, Esperanza was no longer just enduring cruelty. She was shaped by it. It had taught her how the world worked, who held power, and how that power was protected. It had taught her that fear could rule entire lives without ever speaking a word. She did not yet act, she did not yet resist openly, but inside her something important had formed, a clear understanding that cruelty survives when it is accepted and power survives when it is never challenged. Esperanza continued to live, work, and remain unseen. But her life, shaped by cruelty, was quietly preparing her for something more.
Life on the plantations followed the same pattern every day, until one small change broke the rhythm. At first, no one noticed it. Work continued. Orders were given. The furnaces burned as always. But something important had shifted, even if people did not yet have words for it. One evening, a plantation owner did not return home. At first, it did not cause panic. Powerful men often traveled. Sometimes they stayed the night at another estate. Guards assumed it was nothing. Workers were told to stay silent and continue their duties. Esperanza heard the whispers but said nothing. She watched faces instead. She saw confusion in the eyes of the guards and irritation in the voices of those in charge. The next day passed, and the man still did not appear. Questions were asked quietly. Orders became sharper. Guards searched paths and buildings, but only where they were told to look. No one searched near the furnaces. That place was avoided unless necessary. The fire was respected, feared, and left alone. A few days later, another plantation owner vanished. This time, the change in the air was clear. People spoke less. Guards held their weapons tighter. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Plantation owners who once walked freely now traveled with protection. They looked at shadows longer than before. Esperanza noticed everything. The disappearances did not come with screams or public punishment. There were no bodies displayed as warnings. This made them more frightening. Fear grows stronger when there is no explanation. People began filling the silence with guesses. Some blamed workers, some blamed spirits, some blamed rival landowners. The truth stayed hidden, wrapped in smoke and heat. The furnaces continued to burn. Esperanza saw how quickly power turned uneasy. The same men who once laughed loudly now spoke in low voices. The same men who threatened others now feared being alone. Their confidence cracked, even if they tried to hide it. Workers were questioned more harshly. Innocent people were punished to force confessions. Fear spread through the lower ranks, even though they knew nothing. Esperanza saw pain multiply, and it troubled her. She understood that when power feels threatened, it strikes downward first. Still, the disappearances continued. Each time the pattern was similar. A powerful man was last seen inspecting work or calling for a private meeting. Then he was gone. No witnesses, no clear signs of struggle, just absence. Esperanza remained invisible. She continued working as always. She followed orders. She lowered her eyes. She did not speak unless spoken to. This was her strength. People do not suspect those they ignore. And those who believe they control everything rarely imagine danger coming from places they consider small. The guards grew careless in new ways. Some drank more at night to calm their fear. Some slept less and paid less attention. Fear does not make people smarter, it makes them rushed. Esperanza noticed doors left unlocked, paths left unwatched, routines broken. The furnaces burned longer at night. No one questioned it. The plantations depended on fire. Smoke was normal. Heat was normal. Noise was normal. The furnaces had always been places of suffering, so people avoided thinking about them too deeply.
What you refuse to think about can hide many truths. As more men disappeared, the balance of power shifted. Meetings became tense. Arguments broke out between plantation owners. They blamed each other. Trust faded. The unity that once protected them weakened. Esperanza listened when they spoke. She heard fear under their anger. She heard uncertainty under their threats. For the first time in her life, she saw powerful men unsure of themselves. This did not bring her joy. It brought her clarity. She understood something important. Power depends on belief. As long as everyone believes powerful men are untouchable, they remain so. The moment that belief breaks, fear changes sides. The workers noticed it too, even if they did not speak about it openly. People moved differently. They watched guards with new eyes. They listened more closely. Hope did not appear, but something else did, a quiet awareness that the world was not as fixed as it seemed. Still, fear ruled the plantations. Innocent people suffered as punishments increased. Esperanza carried this weight inside her. She did not see herself separate from the pain around her. Every act, every silence, every change had consequences. She understood that the system was reacting, trying to protect itself. Rumors spread beyond the plantations. Nearby towns whispered about cursed land and burning justice. Priests were called to bless buildings. New rules were announced. None of it stopped the disappearances. The furnaces kept burning. Esperanza noticed how often people avoided that place now. Guards posted there asked for reassignment. Workers rushed their tasks and left quickly. Fear had returned to the fire, but this time it belonged to everyone. She also noticed how often plantation owners still underestimated those below them. Even as they feared an unseen threat, they never believed it could come from someone like Esperanza. Their pride blinded them. They searched for enemies who looked powerful, not for quiet workers who listened more than they spoke. The absence of bodies became a message. It said that control was slipping. It said that the rules were no longer clear. It said that even at the top, you could disappear without explanation. By the end of this part of the story, the plantations were no longer calm places of controlled cruelty. They were tense, uneasy, and unstable. The fire that once ruled only the weak now frightened the strong as well. Esperanza remained where she had always been, working, watching, remembering. But the world around her was changing, and once powerful men begin to disappear, nothing can return to the way it was before.
Fear had ruled the plantations for many years, but it had always moved in one direction. It flowed from the powerful to the powerless, from plantation owners to workers, from guards to families who had no protection. Now, that direction was slowly changing. After the disappearances, plantation owners tried to show strength. They increased punishments, they shouted louder, they demanded loyalty. But these actions did not bring back control. Instead, they revealed weakness. When people shout too much, it's often because they are afraid. Esperanza saw this clearly. She noticed how fear made powerful men careless. They trusted familiar routines too much. They believed danger came from rebellion, from crowds, from loud resistance. They did not believe it could come from silence. They did not believe it could come from someone who obeyed every rule. Esperanza understood something important. Fear could be used like a tool, just like fire. The plantation owners had used it for years without mercy. They had taught everyone how it worked. Now that same fear was turning back toward them. She did not rush. She did not act out of anger. She waited and observed. She understood that fear grows strongest when it is controlled, not when it is loud. Sudden violence would bring attention. Quiet actions created confusion. Plantation owners often called for private inspections. They demanded meetings away from others. They believed secrecy protected them. In reality, it made them vulnerable.
Esperanza noticed how easily they trusted their authority to open doors and clear paths. No one questioned them. No one followed them closely. Power gave them freedom, and freedom made them exposed. Fear had already prepared them. They were afraid of crowds, so they avoided public places. They were afraid of revolt, so they focused on workers who spoke loudly. They were afraid of guards betraying them, so they relied more on isolation. All of this worked against them. Esperanza did not see herself as clever or special. She simply understood the world she lived in. She understood that systems built on cruelty contain their own weakness. When fear is used to control others, it eventually controls the one who uses it. The furnaces played a silent role in this change. They had always been symbols of punishment. People avoided them. People feared them. Plantation owners believed the fire belonged to them, that it answered only to their commands. But fire does not belong to anyone. It only follows direction. Esperanza knew the routines around the furnaces better than anyone. She knew when guards were distracted. She knew when the noise of work covered other sounds. She knew how easily the heat hid truth. The same place that had swallowed suffering for years now swallowed secrets. Fear did the rest. Once a few powerful men disappeared, fear took over their thinking. They made choices that isolated them further. They stopped trusting each other. They competed instead of cooperating. They became suspicious of everyone, but never of those they believed were beneath them. Esperanza remained unnoticed. She continued working. She continued listening. She continued blending into the background. She understood that fear does not need to be announced. It spreads through silence, through absence, through unanswered questions. People began to talk in whispers, not just workers, but guards and servants as well. They noticed how powerful men were no longer untouchable. They noticed how quickly strength turned into panic. These thoughts were dangerous, but they were impossible to stop. Fear had changed sides. Esperanza did not celebrate this. She did not feel joy. She felt responsibility. She knew that when fear moves, it hurts everyone in its path. Innocent people were still punished. Accusations increased. Suspicion poisoned daily life. The system was shaking, and when systems shake, they often harm those at the bottom first. This troubled her deeply. She asked herself difficult questions. Was fear enough to bring change? Could fear ever lead to justice? Or would it only create more suffering? Esperanza did not have easy answers, but she knew one thing for certain. Doing nothing would change nothing. Fear had already been used against her people for generations. Turning away from it now would not erase that history. The fire had already burned too many lives. Ignoring it would not make it kinder. Esperanza believed that fear could expose truth, that it could force powerful men to face what they had created. She believed that once fear touched them, even briefly, the world would never look the same again. The plantations felt different now. Guards walked carefully. Owners traveled with hesitation. Orders were questioned silently, even if no one dared to speak openly. Authority no longer felt solid. It felt cracked. Esperanza noticed how quickly respect disappeared once fear arrived. The same men who demanded obedience now begged for loyalty. The same men who punished without mercy now spoke of safety and unity. Their words sounded empty. Fear had stripped away their certainty. The furnaces continued to burn, just as they always had, but their meaning had changed. They were no longer only symbols of control over the weak. They had become reminders that power can be consumed by the same forces it uses. Esperanza stood near the fire many nights, watching the flames move. She did not feel powerful. She felt awake. She understood that fear is dangerous, but ignorance is worse, and the plantation owners had lived too long believing they were beyond consequence. By the end of this part of the story, fear no longer belonged to one side. It moved freely now, touching everyone. The balance had shifted, even if no one dared to admit it openly.
Esperanza remained quiet, unseen, and patient. But fear, once used only as a weapon, had become a mirror, and those who looked into it no longer liked what they saw.
By the time the number reached 14, the plantations were no longer just afraid. They were shaken to their core. This was no longer a series of strange disappearances. It was a crisis that could not be ignored, hidden, or explained away. 14 plantation owners were gone. These were not small men. They were landowners, decision-makers, men who controlled money, workers, and land. Their absence left deep holes in the system. Work slowed, trade stopped, agreements were broken, messages went unanswered. For the first time in many years, Lima's plantation world felt unstable. People outside the plantations began to notice. Merchants complained, officials asked questions, rumors spread into nearby towns. Some people said the land was cursed, others said revenge had come. Many refused to speak at all, afraid that words themselves might bring danger. Inside the plantations, fear changed shape again. Plantation owners reacted the only way they knew how. They blamed downward. Guards were ordered to be harsher, workers were questioned aggressively, innocent people were punished simply to show strength. The belief was simple and wrong. Fear would restore control. Esperanza saw the cost of this. She watched workers dragged away for questioning, not because they were guilty, but because someone had to suffer. She saw families break under pressure. She heard cries at night that had nothing to do with the furnaces and everything to do with panic. This weighed heavily on her. The 14 deaths had shaken the powerful, but the pain still reached the powerless first. Esperanza understood this truth well. Systems built on cruelty do not collapse cleanly. They hurt those at the bottom, even as they crack at the top. Yet something else was happening too. The powerful were no longer united. Suspicion grew among plantation owners. They accused each other of betrayal. Old partnerships broke. Meetings turned hostile. Trust vanished. Men who once stood together now watched each other carefully. Fear made them selfish. Each one wanted to survive, even if others did not. This weakened them more than they realized. Guards noticed the tension. Servants heard arguments. Secrets slipped. Information traveled in quiet ways. The system that once worked smoothly began to fail at small points first, then larger ones. Esperanza observed all of this in silence. She did not move differently. She did not draw attention. She remained the same quiet worker she had always been. This consistency protected her. When people panic, they look for change. Those who appear unchanged are often ignored. The furnaces continued to burn. Smoke rose as it always had. Heat filled the air. To outsiders, nothing looked different, but inside, everything had changed. The fire was no longer just a tool of punishment. It had become a reminder of vulnerability. Plantation owners avoided the furnaces now. They delegated inspections. They rushed their visits. Some refused to go near them at all. The place they once used to control others now made them uncomfortable. Fear had turned the symbol against them. The number 14 became heavy. It was whispered, not spoken loudly. Each disappearance added weight. Together they formed a message that no one could ignore. Power was no longer protection. Officials were sent to investigate. Questions were asked. Records were checked. But the system resisted real answers. Too many people had benefited from silence for too long. To expose the truth would expose everyone. So nothing moved forward. Instead, authorities demanded quick results. Arrests were made without proof, confessions were forced, public punishments returned, meant to show control. But these actions only deepened the fear. They did not solve anything. Esperanza felt torn. She had never believed change would come without pain. She understood that fear could expose injustice, but seeing innocent people suffer tested her resolve. She questioned herself in quiet moments. Was this path leading anywhere better, or was it only repeating the same cruelty in a different direction? These questions did not have easy answers. What Esperanza knew was this: the 14 deaths had broken the illusion of safety that protected the powerful. Once that illusion is broken, it cannot be repaired easily. Even if the system survived, it would never feel the same again. Workers noticed the change too. They did not celebrate, they did not rebel openly, but they observed. They whispered. They noticed that orders were less confident, that guards hesitated, that threats sounded weaker than before. Fear had not disappeared, but it was no longer one-sided. This quiet awareness spread. The plantations became tense spaces. Every sound felt important. Every absence felt dangerous. People avoided eye contact. Nights felt longer. Sleep came harder. Esperanza moved through this world carefully. She understood that moments like these are fragile. One mistake could expose everything. One wrong word could undo years of silence. She stayed patient. She stayed invisible. The 14 deaths were not just about loss of life. They were about loss of certainty. The powerful no longer knew what protected them. The weak no longer fully believed they were powerless. This shift mattered. Even those who condemned the disappearances could not deny their effect. Conversations changed. Authority softened in small ways. Decisions were delayed. Fear slowed cruelty, even if it did not stop it completely. Esperanza saw this and remembered it. By the end of this part of the story, the plantations were no longer ruled by confidence. They were ruled by anxiety. The fire still burned, but it no longer felt owned. It felt unpredictable. 14 deaths had done what years of suffering could not. They had forced everyone to see that power, once challenged, is never the same again. Esperanza continued to work, to watch, and to carry the weight of what was happening around her. The world was shaken, and once shaken this deeply, it would never fully settle again.
By the time officials decided to act directly, fear had already done its work. The plantations were tense, broken by suspicion and silence. Everyone felt watched. Everyone felt unsafe. The powerful demanded answers, not because they cared about truth, but because they needed control back. They began questioning everyone. Guards were asked first, then workers, then servants. People were dragged into rooms and asked the same questions again and again. Where were you that night? Who did you see? What did you hear? Most people knew nothing. Still, pressure increased. Threats were made. Fear returned to familiar places. Esperanza knew this moment would come. She did not panic. She did not run. She understood how systems behave when they are cornered. They look for someone simple, someone close, someone they believe can be broken. It started quietly. A young worker, exhausted and scared, mentioned seeing Esperanza near the furnaces late at night. It was not an accusation, just a memory spoken under pressure. But it was enough. Once a name enters fear, it grows fast. Esperanza was taken without noise. No crowd gathered. No one protested. Arrests had become common. People were too afraid to ask questions. She walked calmly, her hands steady, her face unreadable. Those who watched her go felt something strange. She did not look afraid. She did not resist. She looked ready.
The questioning began immediately. Officials expected denial. They expected tears. They expected confusion. What they did not expect was calm. Esperanza answered questions clearly. She did not argue. She did not insult anyone. She spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. When asked about the missing men, she did not pretend ignorance. She told them what they wanted to know. The room fell silent. Esperanza did not speak like someone confessing to a crime. She spoke like someone explaining a long story that had finally reached its end. She described the furnaces, the routines, the inspections, the trust of powerful men who believed themselves untouchable. She did not raise her voice. She did not show pride. She did not ask for forgiveness. This disturbed the officials more than anger would have. They pressed her harder, expecting her to break. They accused her of lying. They threatened punishment. They promised pain. Esperanza listened to all of it. Then she spoke again. She said the furnaces were already stained long before she ever stood near them with purpose. She said fire had been used as a weapon for years, and everyone in that room knew it. She said the missing men died in the same place where countless innocent people had suffered. Her words made the room uncomfortable. Some officials grew angry. Others avoided her eyes. No one argued with her facts. They argued only with her right to speak. Esperanza did not justify herself with excuses. She did not claim innocence. She also did not accept the label of monster. She spoke about cause and effect, about cruelty that lived openly and punishment that lived quietly, about a system that taught fear and then acted surprised when fear answered back. This made her dangerous. A person who begs can be controlled. A person who screams can be silenced. But a person who speaks without fear forces others to listen, even when they do not want to. Word of her confession spread quickly. Plantation owners demanded harsh punishment. They called her a threat. They called her unnatural. They called her evil. They could not accept that one quiet woman had shaken their world. To them, her existence was an insult to everything they believed about power. Workers heard the rumors too. Some were afraid. Some were confused. Some felt something they had never felt before, a strange mix of fear and respect. Esperanza had spoken aloud what many had only thought in silence. She had named the truth no one wanted to face. The authorities tried to control the story. They described Esperanza as unstable. They painted her as dangerous and alone. They made sure no one spoke of the furnaces in detail. They avoided questions about past punishments. They wanted her to be the problem, not the system. But once words are spoken, they cannot be taken back. Esperanza remained calm throughout her imprisonment. She was not treated kindly, but she was watched closely. Officials feared what she might say if given another chance. Silence surrounded her again, but this time it was different. This silence carried weight. She spent long hours alone, thinking. She thought about the people who had suffered. She thought about the 14 men who were gone. She did not feel joy. She did not feel regret in the way others expected. She felt acceptance. She had done what she believed needed to be done in a world that refused to listen any other way. She also understood that her story no longer belonged to her alone. It belonged to everyone who had lived under fear. The trial approached and tension grew. Plantation owners demanded a public example. They wanted to show that power still ruled. They wanted to remind everyone what happens when the order is challenged. Esperanza knew this too. When asked if she wished to speak again, she did not hesitate. She said she had nothing to take back. She said she had only returned what had been given for generations. Her voice did not shake. Her eyes did not drop. This frightened them more than violence ever could, because fear had failed against her. By the end of this part of the story, Esperanza was no longer just a name whispered in fear. She was a presence, a reminder, a problem the system could not quietly erase.
she had spoken without fear. And once fear loses its hold, even for a moment, power begins to crumble in ways no punishment can fully repair.
The day of judgment arrived slowly, heavy with tension. News of Esperanza's trial spread across the plantations and into nearby towns. People spoke in low voices. Some avoided speaking at all. Everyone understood that this was not just a trial of one woman. It was a trial meant to restore control. The court was filled with powerful men. Plantation owners sat together, dressed well, their faces hard and angry. Officials sat above them, ready to speak in the language of law. Guards stood close, hands ready, eyes alert. Everything was arranged to show authority and strength. Esperanza was brought in quietly. She walked without chains dragging behind her. She did not bow her head. She did not look for sympathy. Her calm presence disturbed the room. People expected fear. They expected shame. What they saw instead was something they could not easily punish: steadiness. The accusations were read aloud. 14 plantation owners, 14 disappearances. Words like murder, rebellion, and threat to order filled the air. Each word was meant to paint Esperanza as something dangerous and inhuman. The court wanted the story to be simple. A monster had appeared, and order would destroy it. But Esperanza did not fit that story. When asked to speak, she stood straight. Her voice was clear. She did not deny what she had done. This shocked many in the room. Confessions usually came with excuses, with crying, with broken voices. Hers came with honesty. She spoke about the world she had lived in. She spoke about fear used as control. She spoke about the furnaces that everyone pretended not to see. She did not raise her voice. She did not insult anyone. She simply described reality as she had known it all her life. Some in the court shifted uncomfortably. Plantation owners interrupted her. They called her a liar. They said she was trying to blame others for her crimes. They demanded silence. The officials allowed her to continue, but only for a short time. They did not want truth to become too clear. Esperanza said something that stayed in the room long after her words ended. She said the men she was accused of killing died in the same system they built. She said fire did not learn cruelty from her. It learned it from them. She said she did not act out of madness, but out of understanding. This angered the court. They did not want understanding. They wanted obedience. Witnesses were brought forward. Some spoke against her out of fear. Some repeated what they had been told to say. Others stayed silent, knowing silence was safer than truth. The court accepted what supported its decision and ignored what did not. Outside the courtroom, people waited. Workers gathered in small groups, pretending to work, pretending not to listen. Guards watched them closely. Fear filled the air again, but it felt different. It was mixed with curiosity, mixed with something dangerous: respect. Not everyone believed Esperanza was right. Not everyone approved of what she had done, but many understood why she had done it, and that understanding could not be punished as easily as actions. The court spoke of justice, but its justice was one-sided. It did not question the past. It did not question the furnaces. It did not question years of suffering. It focused only on restoring the old balance. The decision was made before the trial began. Esperanza was found guilty. The punishment was meant to be severe. It was meant to send a message. The powerful wanted to show that fear still worked, that rebellion, real or imagined, would not be tolerated. They believed an example would erase doubt.
Esperanza listened to the judgment without reaction. She did not beg, she did not scream, she did not curse anyone. This silence unsettled the room more than anger would have. It forced people to sit with their own thoughts. As she was led away, some avoided her eyes. Others stared, trying to understand how one woman could face judgment with such calm. Guards tightened their grip, not because she resisted, but because her calm frightened them. Outside, the reaction spread quietly. Some people felt relief. They believed order would return now that someone had been blamed. Others felt disappointment. They had hoped, even secretly, that the trial might change something. Many felt confusion. They did not know what justice looked like anymore. The plantations did not immediately return to normal. Work resumed, but something was missing. Threats did not sound as strong. Punishments felt more desperate. Fear was still there, but it no longer felt complete. A crack remained. Plantation owners noticed this too. They spoke of safety, of unity, of restoring trust. But trust does not return when it is forced. People remembered Esperanza's words. They remembered her calm. They remembered that fear had not broken her. The trial, meant to erase her influence, had done the opposite. Esperanza became a name people whispered, not loudly, not proudly, but carefully. Her story moved through kitchens, fields, and sleeping quarters. Each retelling changed slightly, but the heart remained the same. She had stood alone and spoken truth in a place built on silence. The authorities tried to stop these whispers. They warned against speaking her name. They punished those who talked too much. But stories do not obey laws. They travel where fear cannot fully reach. Esperanza spent her remaining time in isolation. She was watched closely. Officials feared what she might say if given another chance. They feared her words more than her actions now. She did not write letters. She did not call for followers. She accepted her fate with quiet understanding. She knew the system would punish her body, but it could not fully punish what she had already changed. By the end of this part of the story, judgment had been delivered, but justice remained unclear. The court had proven it still had power, but it had also proven something else. Fear could judge a woman. It could punish her, but it could not make people forget why she stood where she did.
Years passed after Esperanza de Lima disappeared from public sight, but her story did not fade. The authorities believed time would erase her name. They believed silence would bury memory. They were wrong. Life on the plantations continued, but it was never the same. The furnaces still burned, the fields were still worked, and power still rested in the same hands. Yet something invisible had changed. Fear no longer felt complete. It hesitated. It looked over its shoulder. People remembered. They remembered how one woman stood before power and did not lower her eyes. They remembered how she spoke without shouting and still made the room uncomfortable. Even those who disagreed with her actions could not forget her courage. Her story lived quietly, passed from person to person in soft voices. At night, when work ended and guards stepped away, stories were told. Some versions painted Esperanza as a force of fire. Others described her as a calm presence shaped by suffering. Each version carried the same truth. She had broken the silence that protected cruelty. Children grew up hearing her name. They did not know all the details. They did not need to. What mattered was the lesson hidden inside her story. Power was not untouchable, and fear was not eternal. The plantation owners tried to control these stories. They spread their own version, calling Esperanza a criminal, a threat, someone who had to be removed for peace to exist. But these words never carried the same weight as lived experience.
People compared the stories to their own lives and quietly decided which version felt real. Some owners became more cautious, not kinder, but careful. They understood that extreme cruelty carried risk now. Fire was no longer just a tool of control. It had become a symbol that frightened them as well. Others doubled down, believing harsher punishment would erase doubt. But punishment could not reach thoughts. It could not erase memory. It could not undo what had already been understood. Esperanza herself became a symbol, though she never asked to be one. She did not lead an army. She did not write speeches. Her power came from what she represented, a person shaped by cruelty who refused to accept it as natural. Even officials who had sentenced her carried her memory. Some felt justified. Others felt uneasy. A few questioned their own role, late at night when no one was watching. The trial had ended, but its echo continued. Years later, records would be incomplete. Names would be misspelled. Details would blur. Some would argue about facts, but the core of the story remained solid. A woman had existed. A system had been challenged. Fear had been forced to reveal itself. Historians would later debate whether Esperanza was a criminal or a product of her time. They would analyze documents and testimonies. They would argue intention and morality. Yet these debates missed something important. The people who lived through that era already knew the answer in their own way. They knew that her story mattered because it revealed truth. Truth about how power hides behind routine. Truth about how suffering becomes invisible when it is common. Truth about how silence protects cruelty better than walls or guards ever could. Esperanza's name did not appear in monuments. Streets were not named after her. No official honor followed her story. But memory does not need stone to survive. It needs meaning. And her story had meaning. For some, she represented warning. For others, resistance. For many, she was a reminder that human dignity could exist even in places built to destroy it. She showed that calm could be more dangerous to power than anger. As generations passed, the world changed slowly. Laws shifted. Systems evolved. The plantations that once ruled entire lives lost their absolute control. New forms of power replaced old ones, but the lesson remained relevant. People learned that injustice often hides behind tradition, that cruelty often survives because it feels normal, and that change rarely begins with permission. Esperanza de Lima did not live to see these changes. She did not benefit from the future her story helped shape, but her name endured because it carried a question that could not be erased. What happens when fear stops working? That question stayed alive. It appeared whenever someone challenged authority. It surfaced whenever silence felt heavy. It returned whenever people realized that systems do not fall because they are attacked, but because they are understood. In the end, Esperanza was not remembered only for fire. She was remembered for clarity, for standing still while the world demanded submission, for speaking when silence was safer. Her story survived because it was never just about her. It was about power meeting truth and losing control over it.